Oh, I'm back. I can't believe I'm doing this again. For the first time, the controversy surrounding the origins of the idea underpinning the book The Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins has reached a reputable mainstream publication. The Atlantic's Olga Khazan wrote an article titled "Where Did Let Them Come From?" that gives first-hand voice to Cassie Phillips, whose viral 2022 Facebook poem sparked a movement around those two words that Robbins later capitalised on and turned into a best-selling book.
This is the single biggest, most profound and important thing I have ever discovered. Wow. I use this every day in my life.
On the surface, this article appears to be a small victory for those of us who have been shining a light on this issue and its broader implications for small creators and online influencers. But reading the piece more closely, its position is ambiguous. Khazan ultimately sits on the fence, even inviting readers to embrace the kind of apathy that has concerned many people about this philosophy, which, when invoked by a power holder, can be used to maintain the status quo and avoid accountability. In fact, it appears to be a case study in this precise invocation of "let them," as a call to give up rather than to fight for justice. It appears to even go against the mission the Atlantic itself is committed to when they say a subscription supports Atlantic writers who are unafraid to press those in power for on-the-record answers, even when their reporting provokes backlash. This article struggles to do that. In fact, so much so that it fails to press those in power and instead turns the heat on those who are calling power to account, undermining critics with ad hominem tactics, spending half the article questioning motives and painting fair criticism as an issue of professional jealousy. In this latest part of a video series that started in February 2025, I'm going to use this article as an opportunity to really return to the heart of this matter and show how those with power and influence seem interested not so much in uncovering the truth, but in concealing, in diverting, and even ignoring the opportunity to get to the truth. Khazan mentioned this video series in the article itself, though unlike the others referred to by name there, I wasn't approached for comment personally. And weirdly, I was described as a writer, which is fine. I'm not particularly precious about how people describe me. I would never describe myself in that way. But contextually, this word contributes to the article's narrative, which we will look at in greater detail, namely that, quote, "Many people, mostly fellow writers, have come to Cassie Phillips' defence, urging Robbins to credit her. Phillips has become a symbol of sorts for authors who will never earn out their advances, become bestsellers, or otherwise be like Mel Robbins." This is an important point to remember, and it sets the narrative basically of the whole article. I am not a writer in this sense. I have no aspiration to write a book. I had no prior interest in any of this stuff, didn't know any of these people before I came across this post on Threads that was questioning the validity of the story that this person, Mel Robbins, was sharing and telling about her discovery of this idea, the let them theory. And so I, dug into the details of it and quickly found this timeline that didn't align with the official narrative and a movement that had been appropriated and exploited by someone who was essentially an already powerful self-help author and who, as the unnamed editor from a large publisher cited in the article emphasizes, is in the perfect position with a well-established fan base, thanks to her podcast and previous bestseller, to take this idea and run with it.
You take an idea and you really run with it.
After her very initial reels did so well, racking up millions of views, where Mel Robbins was talking about having just heard about this thing called the let them theory.
Just heard about this thing called the let them theory. I freaking love this.
The numbers quickly moved beyond the tens of thousands of social media shares that Cassie's poem had had. And so this meant, at that moment, perception management was in Robbins' hands, with a predictably undiscerning and uncaring critical mass of people now associating the two words with her. Having never seen the original post from which this particular moment is almost certain to have derived, again, emphasis being on this particular moment where let them was in the zeitgeist and being shared around the internet at that time. It's not about ancient origins of the ideas underpinning this. My concern was not financial or professional jealousy. I just saw an abuse of power that was patently dishonest. And through the clear invention of an alternative reality and the omission of any context, Robbins was essentially able to appropriate and to capitalise on and attempt to own through the filing of a trademark for this idea, something that already meant so much to people who were not driven by the same sorts of ambitions. There is another layer here that deserves attention, which is that Olga Khazan is not a neutral observer parachuting into the self-help world as an objective commentator. She is an active participant in it, and I would imagine has a desire not to burn too many bridges with those who could potentially support her own success in the genre. She is the author of Me But Better, The Science and Promise of Personality Change, which is a book that was published in March 2025. And the description of the book reads, is it really possible to change your entire personality in a year? An award-winning journalist experiments with her own personality to find out and reveals the science behind lasting change. So obviously very much in that personal development, self-help world. That doesn't disqualify her from writing this article, but it is important context that helps us consider the angle that she is viewing the Let Them controversy from and those involved in it. And if we're going to get into the weeds of psychoanalyzing, which she does in this article, strangely, it's not really a stretch to see some projections that she makes herself onto the motivation of critics. And I think it really muddies the water of what this article purports to be about. The piece is split into two distinct sections. The first half relays Cassie Phillips' story, giving voice to the pre-existing Let Them movement. Cassie describes where the poem first came from and how she got the original tattoo, a photo of which accompanied the poem, which then became part of that viral post in 2022. And how in May of 2023, Cassie responded to the Instagram post from Mel Robbins, who at that time said she'd just heard about this thing called the Let Them theory. So the first half of the article really does this, moves between Cassie's story, between Khazan's take on the Let Them theory itself. She criticises some of the ideas in the book and reveals that while Mel and her representative declined to be interviewed for the article, her representative told Khazan neither Mel, the fact-checkers, the researchers, nor the publishers saw the poem. That's a line that we've heard before, and as we discussed when this was covered in the New York Post about a year or so ago, it suggests some glaring oversight and perhaps negligence in the research process, because you didn't really need to do a huge amount of digging to come across the poem at the time. And if the research process was as deep and as thorough as we've been told it was, then the poem certainly has been read. Khazan uses Mel Robbins' own words as well to cast shade on her defence. She writes, "But when I read her book, I did wonder. In a passage about starting your own business, Robbins tells her readers to follow the example of a business owner who is already successful and to not be afraid about whether you'll seem like you copied them. Let them think you copied them," she writes, "because you did." In the second half of the article, Khazan introduces some critics, including me, and weirdly begins psychoanalyzing us. She writes, "A writer named Andy Moore, has posted a series of videos on YouTube dissecting the stated timeline of Robbins' discovery of Let Them, attempting to poke holes in the idea that she learned about it on the night of her kid's prom. The videos now have more than 100,000 views, and then in brackets, I've watched several of these and don't find them dispositive either way." Yeah, this is an interesting depiction of these videos with a subtle use of words that primes somebody to receive them in a certain way before they click on the links. You know, she says, "I'm attempting to poke holes in the idea," with a conclusion that she doesn't find these dispositive either way. This undermines the seriousness of the point at hand and makes me wonder if she really has understood what it was that I was saying and what it was that I had uncovered. You know, it's the one part of this story that is irrefutably and objectively provable. Mel Robbins did not first discover the Let Them theory at her son's prom. Whether or not you think that matters is up to you, but what it shows is that Mel has claimed something untrue and that she has never revealed where she heard about this thing called the Let Them theory.
Just heard about this thing called the Let Them theory. I freaking love this.
I will go through the timeline again for those at the back. Sorry if you've heard it before, but it's obviously not quite landed. And quickly, I think it's worth noting that despite others telling Khazan to speak to me about this point, she didn't reach out to me at all. And also despite the fact that she had questions about how I knew about the date of the prom and how I'd pieced this timeline together, rather than investigating this, it would appear that Khazan avoided it. I did not reveal the exact details of the discovery in any of the previous videos because that information, in my view, would have been unnecessary, though it's not difficult to figure out when Mel's son's prom was, and that it was after that original reel. The fact that Khazan didn't follow up on this makes me wonder if she was afraid of finding out or afraid of confirming this. There was really nothing to lose in speaking to me because if she still found it non-dispositive, then she could just say that or ignore it. But the fact that she would have seen the irrefutable evidence for this key detail makes me curious as to the nature of the narrative that she was attempting to spin with this article. To be honest, I'm still not entirely sure what the purpose of it is, other than perhaps to dilute, obfuscate, pacify the story, which again is clear in the final line when she essentially tells readers to rise above the details and let those of us seeking accountability for a clear injustice to keep on arguing while everybody else just ignores it and gets on with life.
If people want to argue over who truly created the let them theory, maybe we should, well, you know.
And this is, it's quite a cynical position in my view. It's also important to emphasize that Mel has never refuted these details. She's never argued against the timeline accusations because she can't. All she can do is undermine those of us pointing them out, which is what Khazan, whether willingly or not, is helping her do in this article.
You say that you got this idea at 54?
Uh-huh.
Did something happen in your life?
What happened that you came to this theory?
I had this life-changing insight. My life changed at a high school prom. I discovered something at a high school prom that changed my life. I can't believe this is where it happened. I turned to Oakley and I'm like, honey, where are you guys going for dinner before prom? And he goes, dinner. You don't have reservations for dinner? This bothered me. And so I start looking for a reservation. Some other moms and dads start trying to figure things out. And Oakley turns to me and says, Mom, you don't have to do that. We're going to go to the taco stand. I just was about to go into monster control mode. And my daughter, Kendall, reaches out and yanks me towards her, grits her teeth, and she's like, Mom, you're being annoying.
Yeah.
Let them do what they want. Let them. It's their prom, not yours. And there was something about her going, let them, let them, that it just hit me. It was like a sledgehammer. And I thought, let them.
So, okay, one last time through the timeline. Let's go back to the original reel when Mel posted on the 13th of May, 2023.
I just heard about this thing called the let them theory. I freaking love this.
And these dates are important because Robbins made the night of her son's prom the moment that she first heard these words, let them, coming from her daughter in response to her attempt to micromanage elements of the prom. The prom happened on Saturday, the 20th of May, 2023, a week after that reel. And with regards to that reel, the book also contains no information about where or what Mel was referring to when she used those now immortal to me words, I've just heard about this thing called the let them theory. You don't say that unless you've heard about it from somewhere. And this is really important because obviously it was prior to the prom. We know that for a fact. And the examples that she cites bear an uncanny resemblance to the poem's cadence and flavour.
If they are showing you who they are and not what you perceived them to be, let them.
If they are not showing up how you need them to show up, do not try to force them to change. Let them be themselves.
Let them show you who they truly are.
Because they are revealing who they are to you. Just let them.
I don't know which part of this Khazan doesn't find dispositive either way. Maybe she is referring to drawing a link between the lies of the origin story and the fact that it was definitely Cassie's words that her viral video was built on. And yes, that's fair enough. Nothing says definitively that she had heard or read the poem at that point, even if it's obvious that she had. There is a carefully crafted absence of attribution to whatever it was that Robbins heard that meant she had just heard about it. But I don't think that's how this sentence about it not being dispositive either way would be interpreted by someone unfamiliar with the story. And given what comes next, it sets up a process that undermines the criticism by picking apart the critics. Sage Justice was responsible for the initial research and a whole series of articles that broke this story at the start of January 2025. And given the amount of work that she put into this, the amount of time and care that she gave to it all, I felt like the reference in this Atlantic article was pretty dismissive. It jokes about how appropriate the name Sage Justice is for a situation like this, before then using Sage's words to shift the focus from one of truth and justice to one of competition, which pivots the narrative of the article in the desired direction. Khazan quotes Sage saying, "If we don't say something, it's just going to keep happening. Then how do writers like us ever get ahead? How do we get that big break?" And this section then finishes with an extra detail, which I find very jarring. Justice mentioned that she is dealing with housing insecurity and financial difficulties, and that she would like a lucrative publishing deal. How do you interpret that sentence? Sage's housing situation has no bearing on whether Mel Robbins' prom story is chronologically possible. These are unrelated details, especially when we have verifiable facts that are left out of the article, left unscrutinised. Instead, Khazan chooses to give attention to details from Sage's personal life that serve to paint a picture that will influence the way the reader receives the words they're reading. One that's then reinforced by the presence of a social media influencer and therapist, Jeff Gunther, who has also been critical of Robbins and the ideas in the Let Them theory online. Khazan shares that as Gunther and I were winding down our conversation, he admitted, "There's jealousy here." And then the article talks about how he doesn't have as many book sales compared with Robbins, and how he'd like to be book famous as well as simply internet famous, because doesn't everyone want to be book famous? So this then sets the article on the next narrative course, which is to suggest that criticism about what Mel has done with the Let Them theory is driven by jealousy and envy. Khazan spends the next part of the article bringing in academic experts to explain envy and the psychology of rooting for underdogs, effectively reframing the controversy as a case study in professional resentment, and bamboozling the reader, who presumably by now is unlikely to be able to tell you what the main purpose of this article is. She writes that people tend to feel most envious of people who seem similar to them and who have achieved something impressive in an area that's relevant to their own identity, and that people have a tendency to root for underdogs out of a sense of justice. Despite what the Let Them theory purports, people like to think that life is fair. So the message is now explicit that those questioning Mel Robbins are motivated essentially by envy and delusion. We are all writers who would love our books to be more popular, except we're not, are we? Now we see why I was described as a writer. It fits the narrative. And this has an uncannily similar flavour to the response that Mel had to the accusations in the New York Post, when she said, "People can obsess over any detail, but the facts are simple. I have not seen her poem, I have not read her poem, and it was not and never will be the source of inspiration for my book." Again, despite the opportunity to address the timeline discrepancies, all of these responses sidestep them, because the only way to respond to the evidence is to admit the fabrication of the prom as the origin story and a premises built on what I still see as a completely unnecessary lie, but a lie nonetheless. As I said in my second video, this framing of detail being obsessed over, or those of us asking for accountability are being obsessive, is a clever use of words to undermine the accountability. When the detail matters, it needs to be addressed. And as has consistently been the case, those details have not been addressed in any way. Robbins reframed us as obsessive. Khazan is building on this to describe us as jealous, as financially desperate, as naive. What does this ensure? The evidence can be ignored, and that is what happens here. There are no real details included in this article, despite it being the best part of 2,500 words long. Cassie Phillips did not write her poem as a book proposal. She wrote it late at night, describing it as a creative response to the loneliness she was experiencing in her marriage at the time. As she says in the article, "I was in survival mode." She didn't trademark it, she didn't pitch it, she shared it, and a community of people who really got it grew around it organically. And when she saw Mel Robbins' video, her first instinct was to message her and thank her for sharing these words, for spreading it further. And I get the impression that despite the assumptions of many people commenting on my videos and stuff that Cassie has written, she is not motivated by money here either. This isn't about a zero-sum game and who deserves the spoils. She says it's about keeping the concept free for everyone to use without fear of needing to pay a license fee to Mel Robbins for the privilege. Khazan notes that Robbins' book includes photos of Let Them tattoos, several of which look like Phillips with similar lettering. These are presented in the book as evidence for Robbins' influence, yet the visual record shows these tattoos appearing online long before Robbins' first post.
People are getting tattoos with your book title on it. Let them.
You rise above them and you feel superior. This is why everybody gets it tattooed on them. Let them, let them, let them. You feel superior to the grocery store. You feel superior to the bad driver. You feel superior to the idiot that's spewing stupid political things like, let them. This has exploded and so many people are getting let them and let me tattoos.
Khazan observes and acknowledges this, but then moves on without asking the obvious question. Did Robbins or her publisher knowingly repurpose images from a movement that predated her involvement? Where did they source these images? Couldn't a publication like The Atlantic look into these issues and give us a dispositive conclusion either way? Cassie's is a fundamentally different orientation to creative work. It's the orientation of the artist, the poet, the songwriter. The goal is not to monetize a concept or churn out book content. The goal is to express something true and let it live in the world. That means standing up to those who plunder and extract from common ground, dominating and exploiting what should belong to all of us. When I saw the timeline discrepancies in Robbins' stories, I documented them because they were there and caught my attention. Not because I wanted what she has, but because I believe that when a powerful person or entity constructs a false origin story and erases the collaborative context that nurtured an idea in exchange for a fabricated hero's journey, that needs pointing out. Not just for the sake of this particular situation, but for the sake of everyone, anyone who has the courage to put their creative spirit out into the world. Khazan's article doesn't seem able to quite accommodate this sort of motivation because it falls outside the entrepreneurial frame that she seems consumed by herself. And later on, Khazan writes, no one would have made such a fuss over Robbins if she'd sold fewer than 1,000 copies, as the majority of books do. And this sentence is meant to support this envy thesis. See, you only care because she's successful, because she's sold this many books. But I find this a really strange point to make, a naive point, a cynical point, perhaps, circular logic. Of course, it would be much less likely that I would have heard about the let them theory if Robbins had sold 1,000 copies or fewer. I didn't follow her, I didn't know anything about it. The sales figures are not the reason for the scrutiny, they were the condition that made the scrutiny possible. Exposure is what brought the story to my attention. Exposure is what revealed the timeline problems that I first saw on Threads. And exposure is what makes the erasure of Cassie Phillips consequential. If Mel Robbins had sold just 1,000 copies or fewer, and I still somehow learned that she was attempting to trademark a phrase she falsely claimed to have coined on prom night, I would still find that objectionable. Nothing changes as far as the moral parameters of the situation goes. The only difference is that I'd be writing this about somebody nobody had ever heard of. And I also imagine that The Atlantic would have no interest in publishing anything to do with it, because this is happening all the time by and to people that we've not heard of. When we do hear about it, do we not have some kind of moral and ethical responsibility to address it? The scale also matters because the harm scales and the truth changes. When you sell 9 million copies of a book, your origin story becomes the cultural fact. Cassie Phillips' actual story becomes lost under the weight of perception. As that unnamed editor cited earlier implies, the size of the platform determines whose version of events becomes history. I received an automated email from The Atlantic after subscribing to read this article, and it contained the following statements, which I found very interesting. An Atlantic subscription is about more than gaining access to our journalism. It's about helping to hold powerful people, governments and corporations accountable at a time when this work is rarer and more essential than ever. A subscription supports Atlantic writers who are unafraid to press those in power for on-the-record answers, even when their reporting provokes backlash. A subscription supports investigative journalists whose reporting has revealed how tech giants are exploiting the work of writers and other artists to build AI systems. What we do is simple but not easy, telling stories that bring more truth into the world. I read these words and then I read the article again. And I struggled to find that accountability. I struggled to find the pressing of power for on-the-record answers. Mel Robbins' representative declined interview requests. This is where the pressing stopped. So what was the point of the article? Why was Khazan dismissive of my claim about the prom and completely uninterested in following it up? Where is the investigation into how a powerful author with a massive platform built a best-selling book on a foundation of claims that contradict publicly available timestamps? Where is the examination of how publishing giants like Hay House handle questions of attribution and origin? Where is the parallel to the exploitation of artists that the Atlantic's own mission statement promises to expose? Instead, the article ends with a shrug and a cynical pun. Taking a step back, one could argue that everyone in this drama is actually doing fine. Robbins certainly seems fine. Phillips has more than 20,000 followers on Instagram and is now working as a freelance writer. She isn't sure she'd want to pursue a settlement with Robbins because it might include a non-disparagement clause and she'd want the freedom to discuss Let Them however she pleased. Fine is a strange concept here. The author judges everything on numbers and the external perception of success, of fine. There seems to be very little question about ethical responsibility, of honesty, of truth, of creative integrity. The values underpinning this piece feel unsettling to me, contributing to a culture where you can basically do, you can grab, you can take whatever you like if you have the power to do so, with the assumption that if you have the money to do so, you could pay for people's silence afterwards. The editor at the prominent publisher could also see the bright side of this saga. He said that at least it means people still care about books. In the age of AI-written novels, he said, it's kind of exciting that there are readers out there interested enough in policing the intellectual integrity of books that they bothered. It's a strange conclusion to me. Everyone's fine, people care about books, and yet isn't there something completely ignored here? It's not about the intellectual integrity of books. For me, at least, it's about the moral foundations of society as a whole, what we are willing to tolerate, what we are willing to amplify, whether inadvertently or intentionally. Why are things as they are right now in the world? I think this story embodies so much of why the world is as it is. And from what I can see, to borrow a phrase, the only thing needed for evil to triumph over good is for the rest of us to shrug our shoulders and say, well, you know.